Stress, Strain, and Coping Mechanisms, an experimental study of fresh college students. Stress is something that all of us experience from time to time but have difficulty defining it. Different ideas were given to explain the word stress. This ranges from simple psychological definition into more interpretive process. Researchers propose that the stress response is mediated by covert or overt cognitive appraisal of events, impinging on the individual ability to handle the stressor. This paper is divided into 6 sections. Following this introduction is the theoretical framework and model. This is followed by the research design, research findings, discussion, and conclusion, respectively. Theoretical framework. Stress is a term that almost everybody from all walks of life knows and uses, yet understanding and assessing stress is a complex task. It is often loosely used to refer to any situation that evokes negative thoughts and feelings in a person. The same situation is not evocative or stressful for all people, and all people do not experience the same negative thoughts and feelings when stressed. Whiteman, 1984. Many people may not be aware that they are undergoing stress. Many people may not be aware that they are undergoing stress. Few recognize that events such as pregnancy, retirement, marriage, death of a close family member, divorce, and writing exams, or a number of smaller events overload the adaptive system of the body, which causes high level of stress. Smith, 1999. McGareth, 1970, defines stress as a substantial imbalance between environmental demand and the response capability of the focal organism, whereas Kaplan, 1983, defined stress as subject's inability to forestall, diminish perception, recall, anticipation, and imagination of disvalued circumstances. Those that in reality or fantasy signify great and or increased distance from desirable, valued experimental states, and consequently evoke a need to approximate the valued states. Theoretical model. The person-environment model is useful in understanding stress among students. According to one variation of this model, an individual can appraise stressful events as challenging or threatening. Lazarus, 1966. When students judge their education as a challenge, stress can bring them a sense of competence, an increased capacity to learn. When education is seen as a threat, however, stress can elicit feelings of helplessness and foreboding sense of loss. College life can be very stressful in one way or the other. Generally, we idolize the college experience and remember it as that idyllic time when we had few worries or responsibilities. To students currently attending college, however, the process is often stressful and frustrating. The competition for grades, the need to perform, peer relationships, fear of failure, career choice, and many other aspects of the college environments are real-life challenges that manifest as mental stress. In one early attempt to define coping, Folkman and Lazarus, 1980, suggested that coping is all cognitive and behavioral. Efforts to master, reduce, or tolerate demands. It makes no difference whether the demands are imposed from the outside, e.g., by family, friend, job, school, or from the inside, e.g., while wrestling with an emotional conflict or setting impossibly high standards. Coping seeks in some way to soften the impact of demands. Lazarus and Folkman concentrated on two types of coping strategies: problem-focused coping and emotion-focused coping. In the problem-focused coping, efforts are made to change the stressful situations through problem solving, decision making, and or direct action. In emotion-focused coping, attempts are made to regulate distressing emotions, sometimes by changing the meaning of the stressful situation cognitively without actually changing the situation. Folkman and Lazarus, 1985. Recent studies done by Richard and Sachi, 2001, indicated that coping includes behavioral and thought employed by the individual to manage the stressing situation. Moreover, according to him, Folkman and Lazarus' theory defines two coping principles. The first category, being problem-focused coping, refers to strategies employed to alter or manage sources of stress. The second category, emotion-focused coping, has to do with the strategies used to manage emotions. Since this study focuses on the stress, strain, and coping among students, it aims to test the applicable way to cope with academic stress, as stated earlier. The study will examine the effectiveness of coping mechanism in managing academic stress by the researcher subjects. This inquiry examines the existing relationship between stress, strain, and coping mechanisms among fresh college students. It expresses in descriptive and quantitative terms the degree of relationships between dependent and independent variables, as well as their magnitude, in line with Vokel and Asher, 1995. These highlight the usefulness of correlation study strategy in situations where experimental research seems difficult. Hypothesis: this is a statistically significant relationship between stress, strain, and coping mechanisms. There is a statistically significant mean difference in the level of stress among students at beginning and the end of semester. There is a significant mean difference in ways students cope with academic stress beginning and end of semester. There is a significant mean difference between experimental group and control group in stress, strain, and coping mechanism. The research population includes all three levels of matriculation center. However, the fresh students are deemed most appropriate sample. The sample of 120 male and female students was randomly selected with the help of Admission and Record (ANR) office. Consequently, each first-year student's name and accommodation room number in relation to his/her program was taken from the AR computer system. Hence, every sample in the population had an equal and independent chance of being selected. The experiment of this study lasted 4 months, during which classes, advices, and guidance on stress coping mechanism were provided to only the experimental group. Members were counseled how to cope with academic stress. Fisher and Hood, 1987, argued that all students groups studied shared increased level of depression, obsession, symptoms, and absent-mindedness within their first 6 weeks of university life. To this end, First-year students are most vulnerable. This justifies their choices as a research sample. All the 120 first-year students were requested to complete the research questionnaire, whose results were grouped into experimental and control groups of 60 students each. Pre-test and post-test quasi-experiment was administered to both groups. The experimental group was subdivided into 3 teams of 20 students with high stress, middle stress, and low stress. Based on pre-test result, Group 1 was given classes only on emotional focused coping, some methods like using social support for emotional reason, positive reinterpretation, and growth. Religious orientation, ETC. The second group was groomed only on problem-focused coping, such as social support for instrumental reason, planning, active coping, behavior disengagement, and so on. The third batch was schooled on both emotional and problem-focused coping mechanisms. Weekly 2-hour lessons were delivered to the experimental group for 16 weeks. At the end of the semester, the same questionnaires on stress and coping mechanism were administered on both experimental and control groups to comparatively evaluate their academic stress coping strategies. The data were analyzed by using the Statistical Package for Social Science (SPSS). The researchers employed an exploratory descriptive approach in analyzing the data involving frequency counts and percentage analysis. The descriptive statistic was used to summarize and describe the prevalence of academic stress, strain, and coping mechanism, and the relationship between them. In this study, the majority of the respondents in the 4 test groups of pre-experimental, pre-control, post-experimental, and post-control maintained moderate level of stress. However, the number of low-stress students jumped by 6% of the sample in the experimental group. On the contrary, the high-stress group raised by 12% in the control group, hence a cumulative impact of counseling stands at 18%. These results could be good outcomes because the student in post-experimental group learned to control their level of stress through the guidance of the researcher. Therefore, at the end of the semester, the time when stress was very high, some of them were low stress. To this end, it's highly recommended to counsel fresh students on academic coping mechanism. This study presents a stress coping counseling program based on series of lessons and personal interactions with fresh matriculation students to investigate the effectiveness of coping mechanism in managing stress and strain. In this study, a 16-week stress coping program based on emotion and problem-focused was administered to an experimental group. Emotion-focused coping showed significantly reduced stress levels, while stress levels in a control group significantly increased over the same period. Study participants experienced the stressful situation of starting pre-university life and experienced increased psychological tension during this period. But those participating in the stress coping program had decreased stress level. Emotion-focused mediation was particularly effective in stress reduction by reducing repetitive and persisting thinking. Jane et al. 2007. In addition, Paul et al. 2007 reported that an 8-week coping meditation program reduced stress and increased college students' sense of control, which is consistent with the results of the current study. The results of this study were consistent with those of similar previous studies, suggesting that a mediation-based stress management program is effective in stress management. Also, the result of this study showed that the developed group program significantly reduced the stress score in the experimental group. The control group's mean stress score increased, and there was a significant difference in mean stress levels between the two groups after controlling for pre-experimental values. This is consistent with the study of Kabak-Zinn et al. 1992, in which the MBSR was applied to patients with anxiety disorder to reduce their anxiety and panic symptoms. There were also positive results reported in Bei and Chang's 2006 study, in which 6 weeks of stress coping mechanism meditation was performed in college students experiencing an examination period. However, the level of depression was not significantly different between the two groups after application of the program. The depression score decreased significantly in the experimental group after participating in the program. However, there was no significant difference between depression score before and after the program in the control group, suggesting only a partial effect of the program. There are a few domestic studies applying meditation-based stress management program. Kim et al. 2004 reported that psychological intervention in nursing students reduced the subject's perception of their stress level, but this was ineffective towards anxiety and depression. On the other hand, the program applied in this study effectively reduced stress levels and anxiety. Shapiro et al. 1998 reported that medical students who performed mindfulness meditation improved their psychological symptoms, including anxiety and depression, increased sympathy, and that these results were maintained even during the examination period in a study in which a stress reduction program with a combination of breathing, meditation, exercise, stretching, and relaxation was applied to patients with anxiety disorder. The program significantly improved the subject's anxiety and depression. Lee et al. 2007, Rosenzweig et al. 2003 reported that mindfulness meditation helped to improve both stress and negative emotion of medical students. This study verified the effectiveness of stress coping program based on emotion and problem-focused coping in fresh students and showed the significance of counseling meditation program as part of academic intervention. However, a further limitation of this case study was the small sample size. However, further studies in a larger sample size are required for the results to be generalized. Pre-degree education can be a stressful experience for some individuals, and many impact negatively on emotional, their well-being, and academic performance. Psychological stress, strain, and coping mechanism not being investigated extensively in fresh teen-aged matriculation students. This research illustrates the nature of stress experience in college life, while adults' vivid remembrance of their student days generally symbolize challenges overcome in their respective success. The youth who are currently passing through that vital stage of life experience academic stress posed by peer competition for grades, self-motivation to attain greater height, defining peer relationships, failure apprehension, and career choice of dilemma. Cumulatively, all these culminate into mental stress. Failure to arrest mental stress among the youth could lead to such victims to take the substance abuse whose public health effect could be disastrous. The results of this study confirm that a stress coping program based on counseling lessons is effective in reducing stress and strain among fresh students. Based on the result of this study, a meditation-based stress reduction counseling program can be instituted among fresh students. It also verified the effectiveness of emotion problem focused coping mechanism, as well as counseling, meditation, intervention in the academic. Hence, the study concur with Person Environment Model of Lazarus 1996. The results highlighted the emotional vulnerability of a significant proportion amongst fresh students, with academic and environmental factor being the great concern, while personal cause of stress such as stressful events and anxiety are more difficult to control. Program academic counseling seemed to be inevitable remedy to student stress. Thank you.